If the dollar collapses, the world doesn't end. It simply changes owners. Empires don't fall when their armies weaken. They fall when their currencies stop commanding faith. And the US dollar, the paper promise that once ruled every border, every market, every human ambition, is quietly facing its reckoning. This is Hidden Finance File, where money, power, and truth collide. They say money makes the world go round. But the dollar doesn't just make the world go round. It defines the spin. Every barrel of oil, every ounce of gold, every debt between nations, all priced, traded, and settled in dollars. That's not economics. That's empire. But what happens when the empire's currency begins to decay? Not with gunfire or rebellion, but with something far more silent. Loss of trust. Picture it. A $1 trillion note floating in a sea of nothing. Digital, invisible, yet worshipped by billions. The dollar has been the world's heartbeat for nearly a century, not because it's backed by gold or silver, but because it's backed by belief. The belief that America always pays its debts. The belief that its power is eternal. The belief that tomorrow the dollar will still buy you something real. But what if tomorrow says no? Every empire in history, Rome, Spain, Britain, believed the same thing. Their money was the sun, their trade routes the orbit. And when their currency fell, their maps were rewritten. Today, 60% of global reserves are still held in dollars. But underneath that dominance, something ancient and familiar is stirring. A slow, strategic retreat from the American financial empire. Central banks are quietly hoarding gold again. Nations are making bilateral trade deals in local currencies. And a new axis, led by China, Russia, and the BRICS alliance, whispers of a world no longer priced in Washington. For most, it sounds like distant politics, but in truth, it's not about countries. It's about who controls the story of value. When you buy oil from Saudi Arabia, it isn't just a transaction, it's an oath to the dollar. When a developing nation borrows from the IMF, it doesn't just receive money. It accepts American time, debt owed in decades of control. The dollar is more than currency. It's the invisible empire, a weapon that conquers without firing a shot. But here's the paradox. The more the world depends on the dollar, the more fragile it becomes, because to maintain its power, the dollar must always be in demand. And to create that demand, others must always be in debt. Debt is the dollar's oxygen. And America's gift to the world has been to make everyone breathe it. Yet now, the air is thinning. China is pushing for yuan settlements in oil and trade. Russia is pricing commodities outside the dollar system. Even U.S. allies quietly accumulate gold to hedge the unthinkable, a world where the dollar's word means less tomorrow than it does today. For decades, America's strength came from one thing. Every global crisis made the dollar stronger. War in the Middle East, investors ran to the dollar. Financial crash in Europe, the dollar rose again. Even when America printed trillions, the world still trusted it, because everything else looked worse. But faith is not infinite. Every new round of quantitative easing, every trillion added to the national debt, chips away at the sacred myth of safety. And when a myth begins to crack, the fall is never slow. If the dollar collapses, the shock won't begin in America. It will ripple outward. Countries holding trillions in reserves will watch their wealth evaporate overnight. Oil markets will seize. Trade routes will freeze. The digital global brain, wired to think in dollars, will stutter, confused. But amid the chaos, someone always wins: those who prepared. Those who held something real. Those who understood that money is not wealth, trust is. The world's new winners may not rise from Wall Street or Washington, but from vaults filled with something older than paper, something that kings and empires once bowed to: gold, land, energy, production. Because when currencies die, history doesn't stop. It resets. The dollar collapse isn't just an end. It's an inheritance, a redistribution of power that's been a century in the making, and the question isn't just who loses when the dollar falls. It's who has been waiting for it to happen all along. In boardrooms across Shanghai, Moscow, and Dubai, deals are being inked that bypass the dollar completely. Nations once chained to the greenback are slowly building their escape routes, payment systems, digital ledgers, and currency swaps. A quiet rebellion against the empire of paper. It's not about war. It's about patience, a chess game played with centuries of strategy, not seconds of greed. The dollar won the 20th century by turning debt into dominance. But as the 21st unfolds, that same debt may be the crack in its crown. And somewhere in the noise of collapsing faith and silent, trade revolutions, a new question emerges. If the dollar no longer rules the world, what will? And perhaps even more dangerously, who should? The story doesn't end here, it's only beginning. The dollar's rule was never just about money, it was about imagination, a shared illusion that every nation agreed to live inside. But illusions, no matter how powerful, need maintenance. And the cracks we see today aren't the beginning of a collapse, they're the signs of an awakening. For nearly a century, the dollar wasn't simply a currency, it was a reflection of American faith. Faith in its economy, its military, and its democracy. But now, that faith is being tested from every direction. The numbers still look strong: GDP, reserve share, bond demand. Yet beneath the statistics, the trust that made those numbers real is quietly evaporating. It began with a promise that a dollar would always be redeemable for something of value. Gold once anchored that promise. Then it was replaced by another kind of gold: oil. When President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold in 1971, the world gasped. But soon after, America found a new foundation: the petrodollar. In a deal with Saudi Arabia, oil would be sold exclusively in US dollars, ensuring global demand for the greenback energy became the new gold, and the dollar became its priest. But priests need believers, and believers, once betrayed, rarely return. 50 years later, that same petrodollar system faces quiet rebellion. Saudi Arabia signs trade deals in yuan. India and Russia swap rupees for oil. China creates its own digital currency, the e-yuan, whispering of a future where payment bypasses the dollar entirely. The dollar still dominates, yes. But dominance isn't the same as invincibility. Empires don't fall when they're weak. They fall when others stop playing their game. The world is learning to play its own, and while America debates politics, inflation, and stock prices, the real war, the war for the next reserve currency, is being fought in code, in contracts, and in silence. Behind closed doors, central banks are rewriting the software of global power. Over 130 countries are exploring central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, programmable money controlled directly by governments. China is already using it. Europe is testing it. And the United States, the empire of the dollar, is watching carefully, afraid to move too fast or too slow. Because digital money changes everything, it removes the dollar's monopoly of trust. When transactions become programmable, every nation can build its own system of faith, no middleman required. And yet there's irony here, a deep, cinematic irony. The dollar, born as a symbol of freedom, could fall not from war or revolution, but from the very technology that freedom created. Still, collapse isn't chaos, it's evolution. Throughout history, every global currency that reigned supreme eventually faced its replacement, not because it failed, but because the world changed. The Dutch guilder, the British pound, the American dollar, each was a story of trust that eventually grew too heavy for one nation to carry. So when people ask, if the dollar collapses, who wins? The answer isn't simple. It's not China or Russia, not gold or Bitcoin. The winners will be those who understand that money is no longer geography. It's infrastructure. It will be the systems that replace belief with code, the nations that learn to trade without translation, and the individuals who realize that the real reserve currency has always been control over information, over trade, over time itself, because maybe the dollar won't vanish overnight. Maybe it will fade quietly, one transaction at a time. Until one morning, the world wakes up and realizes the empire of green has turned into a network of light, and beneath that glow, a new currency begins to whisper, not printed, not minted, but programmed. The age of money as we knew it may be ending, but the story of control is just beginning. And as new powers rise to write that story, one truth remains. Every empire ends, but its shadow never truly dies. The empire of green turns into a network of light, but light can be blinding too, as money evolves from paper to pixels, from trust to algorithm. The human soul stands at a strange crossroads. For centuries, we believed money was real, that it held value because it was printed, counted, held in hand. But now, it flows like electricity, invisible and everywhere, detached from the earth that once gave it meaning. And maybe that's the final evolution, not of currency, but of control. Because digital money doesn't just change how we trade, it changes how we behave. When every transaction is traceable, every purchase programmable, and every coin linked to identity, money stops being a symbol of freedom. It becomes a system of permission. We used to ask, how much do you own? Soon we'll ask, what are you allowed to spend? The fall of the dollar may not look like hyperinflation or market collapse. It might look like quiet compliance, a world where old currencies fade not by destruction, but by replacement. Imagine it. The year is not 1929 or 1971. It's tomorrow. You wake up to a message from your bank. Your digital wallet has been upgraded to a new global standard. No more dollars, no more conversion fees, no more paper. It's faster, cleaner, safer. But with every upgrade, a choice disappears. The power once held in vaults and treasuries now sits in code, unhackable, unstoppable, unaccountable. And somewhere, deep inside that code, someone decides who gets to use it. So who wins if the dollar collapses? Not the poor, not the middle class, not even the billionaires. The winners are those who write the new rules of money, the architects of algorithms, the nations that define the next unit of trust. And yet, this story isn't one of defeat, it's one of recognition. Because every currency in history, from shells to gold to paper, has always been a mirror of what humanity values most. Gold was born from survival. Paper was born from expansion. Digital money, perhaps, is born from control. But even control has a weakness. It depends on obedience. If people believe that value can exist outside of government-issued code, if they believe in decentralized systems, in community trust, in the worth of something tangible or moral, then the balance of power shifts again. History has never favored the currency. It has always favored the belief behind it, and when that belief changes, the world changes with it. In some ways, the collapse of the dollar won't be a tragedy. It will be a reckoning, a reminder that no empire, no currency, no system lasts forever, because money, at its core, has never been wealth. It has always been a story of faith. The United States told the greatest financial story ever written. It convinced the world that paper was power, that promises were as good as gold. For nearly a century, that story shaped everything, from the wars we fought to the dreams we chased. But every story has an ending. And when the final page of the dollar's era turns, the next one won't be written in ink. It'll be written in data, in code, in invisible transactions pulsing through invisible networks. Yet, beneath all that complexity, one timeless truth remains. Money has power only because people believe in it. and belief is something no government, no algorithm, no empire can ever fully control. If the dollar collapses, the winners won't be those holding gold, crypto, or yuan. The real winners will be those who understand why it collapsed and who build a world where value means something again. Because when the paper burns and the code fades, what remains isn't the currency. It's the conscience of those who used it. The fall of the dollar is not the end of money. It's the rebirth of meaning. And in that moment, maybe humanity gets one more chance to remember that the real wealth was never printed. It was always within us. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you question, explore further. And if you want to keep uncovering the truths hidden behind money and power, stay with us. This is Hidden Finance File, where money, power, and truth collide.